My name is Neela Murphy, and my topic is racism in the suffragette movement. Introduction. The suffragette movement was a movement to help get women the right to vote. Once women accomplished having the right to vote, they were now able to do some of the jobs men did. Women were looked at as responsible, mature, and trustworthy. The 19th Amendment was passed in 1919, but 100 years ago, not all women were given the right to vote. Black women weren't given the right to vote until the Civil Rights Act. Thesis. The women's suffrage movement began in the mid-19th century. It is commonly believed to be progressive and inclusive. In reality, many of the leaders were racist and detrimental to progressive African American women, that is, until Ida B. Wells. Theme. My topic, racism in the suffragette movement, connects to the theme debate and diplomacy because these tools were used to fight for the right to vote. Their fight began with the Seneca Falls Convention in New York in 1848. Women used speeches, parades, door-to-door canvassing, lobbying, and newspaper articles to make their case. Some women wanted to debate their point, but some women wanted to negotiate with lawmakers. The movement was also split on voting rights for Black women, which was one of the compromises of the movement. The connection of racism in the suffragette movement to Chicago is that Ida B. Wells moved to Chicago in 1894 and raised her kids here. She did most of her work for Illinois and even marched in the Washington, D.C. parade in the Illinois delegation. Evidence 1. Ida B. Wells founded the Alpha Suffrage Club on January 30th to engage Black women in fighting for their right to vote. Ida had already been working with white women as part of Illinois Equal Suffrage Association to gain suffrage in the state and noticed a lack of Black women participation. In June 1913, Illinois passed a new law granting women limited suffrage, and the Alpha Suffrage Group was an important part of this critical milestone. My sources include 2 books about Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells by Dennis and Judith Frankton, and Ida B. Wells, the Queen by Michelle Guster. And lastly, her autobiography, Crusade for Justice, by her. And discrimination within and outside women's suffrage organizations forced the Black women early on to fight for their right to vote, and also Black male suffrage and civil rights activism. Evidence 2. Despite the belief the suffragette movement was progressive and inclusive, in reality, many leaders were racist and detrimental to expanding the rights of African American women. White women were known to show racism to Black men and women. For example, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony created a national women's suffrage association to insist Black men should not receive the vote before white women. They made this association because they had been fighting for their right to vote longer than African American men. Also, they had been fighting longer than the Civil War. So there is an understanding to why they made this association. The source I used to find this information was African American Women in the 19th Century by Shannon Harley. Evidence 3. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act, along with the Freedom to Vote Act, are acts to stop voter suppression laws. These laws have been passed in the House, but they haven't been passed in the Senate yet. These acts would make Election Day a national holiday. Also, they would require that states require IDs for voting, would have broadened the types of identification acceptable. States would also have same-day voter registration and online registration. The source I used for this information was from MW. In conclusion, the women's suffrage movement began in the mid-19th century, as is commonly believed to be progressive and inclusive. In reality, many of the leaders were racist and detrimental to progressive African American women. That until Ida B. Wells. It is proven by evidence. Ida B. Wells founded the Alpha Suffrage Club on January 30th, 1913, to engage Black women in fighting for their right to vote. The racism and discrimination within and outside the women's suffrage organizations forced Black women early on to fight for their right to vote, and also Black male suffrage and civil rights activism. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act were put into place to stop voter suppression laws. These laws have passed the House but haven't passed the Senate yet. Thank you for listening to my History Fair presentation.